In 1763, peace came to Europe when the 7 Years' War ended, and one thing was obvious. Prussia under Frederick the Great had become the fifth major power in Europe. Austria, previously the sole hegemon in Germany, had found an equal rival in Prussia. No power would allow the other to improve its position without compensation for itself. However, in 1778 the world had its eyes fixed on the war in America, and so a sneaky Austrian emperor took the opportunity. The end of the 7 Years' War confirmed not only Prussia's rise, but also the loss of the formerly Austrian Silesia to Prussia. Silesia had been one of the most prosperous provinces of the Habsburg monarchy. They desperately tried to find compensation for the loss, but it was clear that Prussia would not tolerate any expansion of Austrian power, just as Austria would not tolerate any expansion of Prussian power. How this system could lead to a relatively peaceful solution can be seen in the case of the first partition of Poland in 1772. Due to conflicts in Poland and Lithuania about the election of a new king, the Commonwealth was weakened. The Russians were in a war against the Ottomans and feared that some Polish rebels might align with them. The Austrians used the occasion and occupied provinces on its border, under the pretext of pacifying the rebels there. And the Prussians had no choice but to try and contain a spread of the plague in Poland, and occupied most of the territory between Pomerania and Prussia, declaring it West Prussia, and finally achieving a connection of the two major territorial accumulations. With 110,000 square kilometers and 1.8 million subjects, Russia gained a lot, but that was not that important for the inner German conflict. Austria gained 2.7 million subjects and 70,000 square kilometers. Prussia gained only 600,000 subjects and 35,000 square kilometers. It looks like Prussia got the worst part of the deal, but keep the geographical context in mind. By connecting Brandenburg, Pomerania and Prussia, Frederick the Great's position improved greatly. However, the partition served also as a warning to the smaller principalities in the Holy Roman Empire. The imperial estates had to realize that the order in the Reich, now factually based on a balance of power, only worked if there was distrust between the two major estates. But now there was a taste about what could happen if the mighty two, in violation of the system, acted in unison in the empire. All of this happened outside the Reich, and so it was not that big a problem in the German estates. But this also meant that although Austria gained big, it did not compensate them for the loss of Silesia. The Austrians had to look for an alternative. Such an opportunity arose in 1777. Nearly 15 years after the 7 Years' War, the new emperor and co-regent of Maria Theresia, Joseph II, decided to make good on the losses of earlier decades. He turned to the nearest neighbor in the Holy Roman Empire, Bavaria. The ruler of Bavaria was the Prince-Elector and Duke Maximilian III. He came from a junior line of the Wittelsbach noble family and happened to have no issues. Austria dug deep into the archives and managed to construct a claim on Bavaria and Franconia. The heir apparent to Maximilian III was Karl Theodor from the senior branch of the House of Wittelsbach. He happened to be the Count Palatine of Pfalz-Sulzbach and possessed the Margraviate Bergen op Zoom in the Netherlands, which he inherited from his mother. Just like with Maximilian in Bavaria, Karl Theodor had another relative who did him the courtesy to die without an heir and thereby give him the Duchy of Jülichberg. As you can see, Karl Theodor was one of the more powerful noblemen in the Holy Roman Empire and controlled a chunk of territory, although his lands were somewhat scattered. Obtaining Bavaria would increase his power even more, although at the expense of an even less desirable geographical distribution. It was not surprising that when the Bavarian Prince-Elector Maximilian III died on December 30th, 1777, Joseph II, the Habsburg Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, immediately studied the alliances in Europe and planned his next steps. Of course, Prussia under Frederick the Great would not fancy any Austrian gains and would do everything to antagonize Joseph. Furthermore, the Hohenzollern had a sideline of the house governing Ansbach-Bayreuth in Franconia, and thereby interests close to Bavaria too. From France, Austria's ally in the 7 Years' War, Austria could not expect any support. France was eager to join in the American War of Independence and was not keen on fighting another war in Europe. Russia had switched sides during the last big war and theoretically would have been ready to support Prussia and antagonize Austria. However, the Russians just started to pick a fight with the Khan of the Crimea, and therefore the Russian army was occupied. Without the intervention of the other great powers in a war between Prussia and Austria, there was something to gain. In the end, Austria had eyed Bavaria for at least 100 years. So Joseph II took a deep breath and approached Karl Theodor. The Count Palatine knew that he was in a tough spot. The Austrians, the foremost power in the empire, wanted his new possessions in Bavaria. The Prussians, on the other hand, had their eyes on his territory too. They had lands in the west, close to Karl Theodor's big and compact duchies of Jülich and Berg. Frederick would have loved to seize them from him. The Austrians knew this and made an offer Karl Theodor could not refuse. They demanded nearly all of Lower Bavaria, including the most productive grain-growing areas and the salt mines of Reichenhall. In return, Karl Theodor would try to cope with it. As a sign of goodwill, Joseph II also threw positions at court for Karl Theodor's mass of bastards into the bargain. Karl Theodor was a weak and spiritless man, without enthusiasm for the Bavarian land or people whom he was in future to govern. His own real anxiety, though natural, was not entirely creditable. He wished to leave ample provision after his death for his numerous illegitimate children. The Austrian proposal included two further options. First, the new border could be straightened by Austria, receiving everything east of a line between the point where the Inn leaves Tyrol and Waldmünchen, close to Bohemia. In return, the Habsburgs would graciously return all territory west of this line to Karl Theodor if he officially accepted to cede his territory. More important was the second proposal. In this case, Austria would gain most of Lower and Upper Bavaria, some possessions in the Upper Palatinate and Mindelheim in Swabia. But in this case, Karl Theodor would actually gain a big reward. He would receive Luxembourg and Limburg as well as the Austrian territories in Vorderösterreich. Vorderösterreich was Habsburg territory, reaching from the east of the Bodensee, Lake Constance, to the area around Freiburg, and it was absolutely scattered all over the place, with some territories here and some land there. So please forgive me for not showing everything on the map. The map makes it clear why these exchanges would be beneficial for both sides. Joseph II would concentrate his territories more coherently. For Karl Theodor, the case was similar. Although his power base would remain splintered, it would shift to the west towards his existing properties. Karl Theodor realized this and showed to be willing to accept, although in addition he demanded the title of a king. Nevertheless, Joseph II must have thought that Karl Theodor needed a little push. The emperor threatened to declare Bavaria a lapsed fief and occupied everything, leaving to Karl Theodor only his titles. On January 16, 1778, the Count Palatine accepted. Karl Theodor's acceptance arrived in Vienna on the same day. Some 10,000 Austrian troops immediately crossed into Bavaria to enforce the exchange accepted by the elector. The Austrians were very careful, paid for all the supplies, and everything went peacefully. I guess everyone lived happily ever after. Well, no. In the north of Germany, the Prussian king Frederick II eyed the improvement of Austria's strategic position with deep distrust. He immediately sent his minions to work. First, he made contact with the Saxon dynasty, who had some claims on Bavaria and feared Austrian expansion. He managed to bring them into his camp, although his troops had ravished Saxony in the 7 Years' War. Saxony's alliance was important because of its strategic location between the two big powers. During the negotiations between Joseph II and Karl Theodor, Frederick's diplomat tried to contact Karl Theodor, but the elector refused to talk to him, probably because he knew that the Prussians were eager to take his other territories. Therefore, Frederick's diplomat proceeded to Karl August, the unimportant Duke of Zweibrücken. He was the heir apparent to the childless Karl Theodor. Unfortunately for the Habsburgs, they had once rejected a proposal by Karl August for the hand of one of Maria Theresia's daughters. He was determined to take his revenge. Karl August's mission was to stand in front of the Reichstag and protest the Austrian actions. He would call for the Prussians to protect the liberties of the smaller German states and the constitution of the German Empire. Happily, he did so. Nevertheless, this protest was futile. In the end, the Austrians had marched peacefully into a territory whose ruler had agreed to it. However, Karl August ruled only a small territory, which actually was the private property of the French king. He smelled that a little bit more could be extracted from the whole business, and he was right. Joseph offered to take over the payment of his debts as well as a small county in Austria. Just to make sure, the Austrian negotiators threw in another threat to occupy all of Bavaria. Although strongly tempted, Karl August rejected the offer and promised to Frederick to act in unison with Prussia. The situation was close to spiraling out of control. An Austrian diplomatic offensive tried to calm things down by offering Jülich and Berg to Prussia and confirming the Prussian claim on Ansbach-Bayreuth, but for Frederick this was impossible. He had played the role of the protector of the minor states and could not just change course. Additionally, it was not just about gains. This was not a question of acquisitions or enlargements, but rather of once and for all putting oneself in the way of Austrian ambition. The least weakness at this point, the least indulgence, would restore the system of Emperor Ferdinand. Everything must be done to prevent Austria from imposing its will upon the empire. If Austria did not withdraw from Bavaria, Prussia would face them, no matter if any allies intervened. This was the situation in February of 1778. Germany awaited spring, and with spring, war. The negotiations sound like a sequence of offers and counteroffers. In fact, they were more a sign of insecurity on account of both rulers, Frederick and Joseph. They constantly changed their mind. One day they believed scenarios in which the enemy had no troops ready. On the next day they feared to be overwhelmed. In order to find an escape, Joseph II tried to provide a better deal for Karl Theodor and his heir Karl August. The Wittelsbacher would get land in Poland and a crown to reign it as king. As you can imagine, nobody took this offer seriously. What should the Count Palatine do with faraway territories in Poland? The Habsburgs drew up their final offer. Karl Theodor would give up all he agreed on and receive what Austria had promised. Additionally, he would give up the rest of Bavaria and receive the Austrian Netherlands in return. This would be a highly beneficial exchange for both parties. The Austrian Netherlands had been a Habsburg possession since the War of the Spanish Succession. Although one of the richest Austrian provinces and geographically compact, it was a nuisance to the Austrian grand strategy. It was able to field 20,000 soldiers, but those were far away from the Habsburg Empire's core. For example, getting troops from the Netherlands to fight the Ottomans was expensive and depended on the cooperation of the other German states. Sending troops the other way around posed the same problem. Bavaria was much easier to defend, and the Danube, the bloodline of the Habsburg lands, would easily connect it to the rest of the empire. The incorporation of Bavaria would also make the access to the Italian possessions easier, since Bavaria controlled important trading routes and provided a connection independent of this annoying bishopric Salzburg. Furthermore, Bavarian language and culture was a much better fit for Austria than the half-French, half-Dutch population of the Austrian Netherlands. For the Wittelsbacher, the situation was similar. Their territories would grow into a compact kingdom, the New Burgundy, as Karl August liked to dream of his future lands. The pact would rid them of the Austrian interest in their territories and at the same time give them a chance to fend off the Prussians, who always eyed Jülich and Berg with envy. However, Frederick stayed stubborn. While preparations for war reached high speed, Austria decided to try another way and sacrifice Karl Theodor. Again, the Austrians offered Frederick Karl Theodor's important duchies Jülich and Berg. Frederick left to join his army, but pretended to continue the negotiations. The Russians were close to making peace with the Turks, and this strengthened his position. With the occupation of Bavaria, Frederick had already seen how far Joseph II had been willing to go, and his long-lasting enmity towards Austria did the rest. Austria would have to withdraw or face war. We end this video in a situation where all signs point towards war. Was there a way to get through with the deal without all of it ending in violence? If you have an idea, tell me in the comments. We will continue with this story soon enough. Until then, you can appreciate my map of the Holy Roman Empire by pressing the subscribe button once for every principality in the empire. Stay critical, stay curious, stay free.